I Hate Politics is a podcast dedicated to exploring a human activity we love to hate. We look at human life, culture, and economics closest to us in our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and in our local governments. Together, we will explore how politics is central to getting things done in societies where we treasure diverse views and preferences. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. I've spent my life studying politics, and I know this. Unless we want to live in a dictatorship or monarchy, we are stuck with politics. Politics is more than Trump, Biden, or elections. It's how we fix potholes, make our streets safer, where we put our schools, and decide who goes to them. It's about coming together as a community. It's about us. Let's go find those stories. Yes, behind the chirping of the birds and other suburban noises is the roar of brood 10 of cicadas that have invaded mid-Atlantic United States. The noise is expected to grow in the coming weeks to reach 100 decibels. It's Memorial Day weekend, the start of the culture of summer, if not the calendar of summer. The pandemic is on the wane. The majority of us in the Washington, D.C. area are vaccinated at least once. Masks are off. Gatherings are okay. Pools are opening. We want to be outside. And so we are doing an episode on outdoor learning and what it means for our approach to education. For this episode, I have a very special guest, Elana Mintz, founder and executive director of DC-based outdoor education nonprofit Urban Adventure Squad, or UAS, as they like to call themselves. I'm also joined by Carol Allen, who writes the Insect Index column for Washington Gardener magazine, to talk about the flavor of this spring, cicadas. If you haven't noticed already, cicadas are everywhere, but there seems to be a significant variation in their densities within and between neighborhoods, and the woods seem to have far fewer. Why? Carol discusses competing hypotheses. Full disclosure, I am married to Elana Mintz, and in the first few years of UAS, I worked closely with her to get the organization up and running. I moved away from active participation in 2016 and mostly now hear about what they do as a spouse. In this episode, we use original music from Bad Robot Jones, a Washington, D.C. area band of escaped androids on the run. Mixing punk, progressive, and indie rock, they play songs about assassin robots, Vulcan rituals, and the fall of galactic empires. Zach Parkman on vocals and guitar, Doogie Whitaker on bass and vocals, and Joey Jenkins on drums. Take it away, guys. If you want to showcase your music on the podcast or know someone who does, please email ihppod@gmail.com.
Try to take my way out of this lighthouse, out of time.
Don't know if you've been following the Michigas around Maryland PTA. National PTA, which was established 100 years ago as the apex of a parent-teacher association network that starts in local schools around the country, removed affiliation from the Maryland unit over mismanagement. Maryland PTA declared independence and separated. Now, National PTA is incorporating a new nonprofit entity with the name Free State PTA to be its affiliate in Maryland. The state-level entity is important because it holds the umbrella 501c3 status, the nonprofit status, for all school PTA is in the state. But Free State PTA? Technically, the nickname was adopted when Maryland rejected the alcohol ban following Congress passing prohibition in 1919. But offhand, the term is more associated with the end of slavery. Maryland finally and very narrowly approved a referendum freeing slaves and became a free state on November 1st, 1864. Local PTA leaders told the national PTA team that the name was poor choice, but apparently the paperwork was already filed. National PTA has been battling the old Maryland PTA for over a year, even through the pandemic. Apart from the mismanagement charges, Maryland PTA resisted allowing electronic voting for local PTAs in the state during COVID, hobbling many operations. Starting spring of 2020, inability to vote because of the statewide lockdown made it near impossible to elect new officers or pass budgets at a time when PTAs needed to step up support for students, teachers, and families. 3 regional directors in Montgomery County are set to retire in June. Kathy Matthews, Luisa Montero, and Riamberto Rodriguez, who have served many years as Up-County, Mid-County, and Silver Spring Regional Services Directors, are leaving the county government. Riamberto Rodriguez is informally known as the mayor of Silver Spring. Silver Spring does not have a mayor or its own municipal government because it is not an incorporated town within Montgomery County. In contrast, Silver Spring's neighbor, Tacoma Park, is an incorporated city with its own mayor and council. So are Rockville and Gaithersburg. The Regional Services Director is a coordinating office for the county government agencies in different parts of the county. The directors are appointed, not elected. There are 5 of them, roughly coinciding with the 5 county council districts. But of course, their responsibilities exclude incorporated areas such as Tacoma Park. The regional services directors bring county government services to the people and act as the eyes and ears for county executive and the chief administrative officer. These are not easy jobs by any means. Regional services directors are part of a dense network of interactions between local government and civil society that is not peculiar to Montgomery County, but where it has developed into high art. If you think this is a job for you, apply. You can really make a difference. Those who travel on Connecticut Avenue in Chevy Chase will recognize the massive 4-H conference center on the west side of the neighborhood in the municipality called the Town of Chevy Chase. The 4-H organization is selling its 12-acre compound, and understandably, the next use of that parcel is causing consternation. The Town of Chevy Chase has several agreements pertaining to the property, including a 81-foot setback and other use restrictions. The town also has ordinances on building, urban forest, water drainage that will govern next use of the property. To get a favorable outcome, the town has hired a consultant for more than $10,000 a month to represent its interests in the impending sale. The town wants to ensure open public access to forested areas, a public recreation area with amenities, compatible housing development. Now that's a term of art, compatible. Good stormwater management and abatement of hazards, traffic, and crowding in schools. The primary election is now about a year out, scheduled for June 28, 2022. In Montgomery County, and even some statewide races, the primary can often be more important than the general elections because the county and the state are so heavily Democratic. The real political fight is not between Democrats and Republicans, but within and among Democrats offering differing visions. At I Hate Politics, we will not only be covering local and state and some federal races, we are planning a series of in-depth candidate interviews. Having personally been through the speed dating experience offered by candidate forums, I'm asking candidates to pick a topic that shows them off at their best, and I will interview them in depth on that subject. If you are a candidate or have a favorite candidate, please reach out at ihppod@gmail.com or on Twitter at ihppod. I'll be back with Elana Mintz of Urban Adventures Forum. Elana Mintz, welcome to I Hit Politics.
Thank you for having me. I've heard a lot about this podcast.
Okay, so can you speak briefly to what Urban Adventure Squad does?
We are a DC-based nonprofit that takes kids outdoors every day, all year round, in any kind of weather. And we do that in partnership with schools and to support families on days when schools are closed, after school. And we basically use the city as the classroom. Hike on trails in the woods, hike through the streets of DC, and we do that in every ward of DC. DC is divided into 8 wards, and we're everywhere as often as we can be.
So, what is your argument about reopening schools via outdoor education?
So I think one big missed opportunity is that both before COVID and during COVID, we have not used school grounds and the neighborhoods around school as much as we could. And I think that reopening would have been and will continue to be a lot easier if we open our minds to that. And when I say our, I mean collectively as a community, as school systems, because it's really not happening. And the context of your question changes, every day, it seems. So now we pretty much know that school will fully reopen 5 days a week at full capacity, it seems, for most, if not all, local school systems. Elementary school kids are not likely to be vaccinated. They may be, maybe things change over the summer, but we still have large populations of children returning to classrooms who will not have an opportunity to be vaccinated. So I think both to relieve some space in classrooms, get kids outdoors, we have to be able to embrace the use of our neighborhoods and school grounds. I think particularly this fall, we're going to see lots of children coming back into classrooms who have not been inside a classroom. There are many, many, many kids who are still learning virtually. They've not been inside a classroom for about 1.5 years, and there are going to be behavioral challenges. Teachers are largely burnt out. And being outdoors in any capacity is a huge help. Introducing movement, allowing kids to be outside will help address some of those behavioral challenges.
You ran programs during the pandemic. Can you speak to what changes you had to make to run programs?
We decided in September 2020 that we had to go back outdoors. We were ready, we were nervous, but it gave us an opportunity to experiment with small group, fully outdoor programs. And we experimented with how much time can we be outside without access to a bathroom? 2 hours, 3 hours, what age groups is that appropriate for? We decided we generally serve kindergarten through 8th grades, and then we have high school volunteers. For our COVID safe, fully outdoor programs, we decided to limit our ages to grades 3 through 8 because we were concerned about the lack of bathroom access. We were not going to serve snacks at our programs anymore as we did pre-COVID. So we started experimenting with about 6 to 7 children per educator. So we could take up to maybe 18 to 20 children per program. And we started with 2-hour programs after school, popping up in different neighborhoods around DC. And then for days when schools were closed, we did a couple of 3-hour programs. And we did this in public parks and green spaces, and we continue to do it throughout DC. Sometimes we would get a request to try a new neighborhood or to offer an outdoor learning program for an interested nonprofit that might want to have us join and activate a public park like Friends of Oxen Run Park in Ward 8. They were interested in offering outdoor learning opportunities, and they do that. And we said, great, we'll come offer a program there. So we did one on rain gardens. And so we continue to experiment. We basically ran 3 to 4 weekly programs. We probably served about 150 students between September 2020 and around now. That's our number. And many of those children returned every week.
When we talk about outdoor education, a lot of the emphasis seems to be on renting these tents, even air-conditioned tents, large infrastructure things that have to be done in a school setting. I mean, particularly perhaps in a public school setting. How do you think teachers and administrators could make outdoor education possible?
First and easiest thing to do is to consider taking lunch outside. And I'll bet if there are administrators or teachers who hear this, their immediate reaction might be like, "Oh, that sounds like a nightmare. I think that sounds like too much." And I can understand that. I sympathize with a lot of that, and I want to make sure I understand where that's coming from. But I think when you give children opportunities to do something as simple as, hey, so today we're going to cycle through the cafeteria, we're going to get our lunch trays, and we're going to go right out the door to the playground. And then we're going to go sit just off the playground, that green space. And if we can do that really well, we can do this like 3 days a week. What do you guys think? Can we do this together? And then you get out to the playground with your lunch trays or kids bringing their lunch bags from home, and you can have a quick conversation about, hey, we're going to do this and make sure we dispose of our trash properly. And by the way, do you know what happens if we don't dispose of our trash properly? If we leave some trash on the playground and wind and water start to move it toward our storm drain, and immediately you have this like wonderful time together outside, and you have like a built-in lesson about, where does our trash go? It goes to our waterways through the storm drain on our block. But it can be much simpler than that. It literally means, can we try and go outside for lunch today? Can we take a walk around the block to find some living things? It is incredibly exciting to go outside together as a group. I can feel that when I'm with students. So if you set the expectations and say, the most important thing is for us to stay safe, and here's how we're going to do that. Here's how we're going to cross the street. Here's how we're going to look out for each other. Here's how we're going to look out for cars. And here's what our destination is going to be. And here's what time we need to come back. If you give kids the opportunity to sort of lead together, be themselves, support each other, you can do so much. And you can get outside of school safely without those worries. And you will absolutely increase the joy of the classroom and the learning opportunities.
Let me push you on this a little bit. So in Urban Adventure Squad, you have a student to staff ratio of 6 to 7 students to 1. And suddenly there's a teacher with 25 kids. There is an expectation of safety on the part of parents sending their kids to school. So how do you resolve this when it comes to school? Are you suggesting some way in which parent volunteers are included in a more regular basis? How does that work?
I think that's possible, but we don't depend on parent volunteers, and we wouldn't expect schools to. I think that can be really difficult and to sustain. But I think you have to back up a little bit further to how you can start to address this in the culture of the school. We ask so much of teachers, and we know that a 1 teacher to 25 student ratio is extraordinarily difficult on so many levels of teaching. I also know that we're not going to get to a point quickly where we're going to have anything that looks like 1 educator to 6 to 7 students. But I think in between those two places, there's a way to say, look, we want to be able to do more of this. What is possible with the staff we have? The other part of this that we haven't talked about yet is partnerships with organizations like ours. There is actually a ton of outdoor learning going on across DC with organizations like ours that are regularly educating children outdoors. I'm thinking of Living Classrooms, Anacostia Riverkeeper. There are so many, Capital Experience Lab, who I mentioned. There are so many of us who are well-versed in the outdoors that can and already have existing partnerships with schools. And we are leveraging them and trying to leverage them now to support schools. So for example, one school we work with is Elsie Whitlow Stokes Community Freedom Public Charter School. It's a public charter school that has campuses in Ward 5 and Ward 7 in DC. And we've partnered with them on various things, grant funded opportunities. In the early days of our programs, we ran our programs when schools are closed for lots of public schools. We ran them from the school. And so we are a trusted partner to them. And so they are very comfortable giving their teachers a break The teachers can join us for this outdoor learning time if they want to, as professional development, just to see and interact with their students in person. But while we are running the outdoor programs for their students, their teachers are not teaching. They are either having planning time, they're taking a break, or they're joining us in person. And so when you have those kind of partnerships, you can engage many more students. You can actually give teachers what they need, which is a little bit of breathing space. Look, we can do curriculum aligned programming. So if you're working on Civil War history, that will be our program that week, so that we can align with what the teacher is doing that particular week and address that. Or we can run our program just as we would. We're going to do a geology program. It may not relate to what the students are doing that particular week, but it certainly hits a lot of the science standards that they need to hit anyway. Or we can do that and then send, a little summary to the teachers, and they can decide whether they want to connect and extend that into their classrooms.
Earlier, you had said that, eating lunch outside is an opportunity to learn about plastic trash, or learn about trees or insects, which seems opportunistic learning, right? But a lot of our learning is very driven and curriculum driven. So how do you manage to be curriculum driven and yet outdoors? How do you do that?
I'm not suggesting that lunchtime should be curriculum aligned. I just want to make that clear. Eating lunch outside is to get both the school and the students into the culture of embracing the outdoors. Because if you can eat lunch outside successfully as a group, clean up after yourselves, come back in, not be late, get organized, over time, then you can do the same thing. If you've only got a 40-minute block for English language arts, for example, you can take that 40-minute block, and some teachers will say, how am I going to get my kids outside, back inside? But what I sometimes say is, what's the lesson that's coming up? What are you trying to do? And if they say something like it's a persuasive argument, you can take that lesson right outside. And sometimes it's difficult because maybe the lesson is, it requires Chromebooks, but maybe if we can think about a little bit taking actual notebooks and pencils and just walking outside the school, I think what might happen is the first 3 times you did it, it would be a little bit of a mess, and it would take a long time, and it takes 10 minutes to get outside. But if you set the expectations that, hey, when the weather's nice, we're going to do ELA outside on these particular days, then it's something that the children can look forward to and help make it happen. You might go out there for an ELA lesson, or you might go out there to do something about persuasive arguments. And if you've got your lesson planned and ready to go, but you have some flexibility, you will find that the children start asking questions that are maybe different from what they ask inside. This needs to be part of the culture of our school systems so that we can support teachers in doing that. Because what I get every day is the incredible privilege of being able to see children in the woods processing things and asking questions, like the cicada excitement last week. There were some children who were afraid of it, afraid of cicadas, and I knew that, but it was an opportunity to talk about it, talk about exoskeletons, talk about our fears around cicadas, how we might address them, and then go find them. And we basically went all over this neighborhood, but that wasn't necessarily part of the lesson. The lesson was on birding. So we did our birding, we talked about different species of birds, but that's a very easy connection to cicadas. And that was that's an hour or 90 minutes with a group of children. And we squeezed a lot in there, but the most compelling part of it is the level of happiness was off the charts.
I do want to ask about the real problem of weather protection, and particularly this is an issue during the winter when you have to have appropriate clothing, but also in the spring with air quality. So what are your solutions to that?
I think we had to cancel maybe 1 or 2 programs. We ran them all year. I mean, we were building fires in fire pits in Carter Barron Amphitheater, which is on 16th Street in DC. But if we had an indoor space, so for example, this summer, this is what we're getting ready for. We will be running our first ever fully outdoor full day programs. And we've never done that before. Pre-COVID, all of our programs were based in a church or a synagogue or at Gallaudet University, where we always had a classroom space. And then we would go out for 3-4 hours, but we started from and returned to a classroom space, very easy bathroom access. So the big challenge this summer was we need to run full day programs. We need to provide families with some more support than 2 or 3 hour programs. It's time. How are we going to do it? So we partnered with places like Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens and the Washington Youth Garden at the National Arboretum, the Omni Shoreham Hotel in Woodley Park, and all of these places we have agreements with. We will be there. It might be a porta potty, there might be an inside bathroom, but we have a plan for emergency shelter for weather-related problems or other kinds of emergencies. The only weather we really have to cancel our programs for is something treacherous, ice storm in the winter, lightning, hearing thunder. As far as, some people say, well, it's not equitable because some children don't have the right clothing. Well, that's where our donors came in. Again, this is a burden I would not want to put on a public school system, but it is absolutely doable that schools have a supply of clothing in case a child or many children are not properly dressed for the weather. And we asked our donors to help us with hand and toe warmers. And we had an amazing outdoor learning activist who was knitting beautiful wool hats for us with her children, neck warmers. So we never had, as hard as 2020 was, we never were at a loss of supplies that we could use. And it's really important to emphasize that the most money we spend is on educators, instructional and preparation time. Supplies are just not that expensive. You do not need tents. You don't need air-conditioned tents. You need enough clothes that children are comfortable. And if their socks get wet, you swap them out and you have a dry pair of socks. That's something that's absolutely possible in the context of a public school.
What are some good models for outdoor education that you've seen?
To me, it's a little bit sad that I think that what we see as outdoor learning, we've allowed it to become the realm of private schools. So when I drive around DC, invariably I see a large tent in 2020 and 2021, and it's generally on the grounds of a private school. When we talk about forest kindergartens, that's how a lot of people connect with outdoor learning. That's what they understand it. Private schools. There's some success in public charter schools because they do have more autonomy. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting and a little sad is that, I like to look at the outdoor learning hashtag on social media, and a lot of the posts that come up are in the UK. They're not in the United States. So there are a couple of public school systems who are doing more. And as I said, there are outdoor learning organizations that are working in partnership with schools. The other example I have for you is that Urban Adventure Squad recently started a partnership with Bancroft Elementary School in Washington, DC. It's a DC public school. I think the first or one of the first to access some outdoor learning funds that the DC government had made available, which is very exciting. But to be very honest, the amount of work that went into getting those programs off the ground. These are weekly programs every Wednesday. Again, just incredibly joyful to be there. The children are fun. The families are so excited. The teachers are going to start coming to visit, I think, soon. But just getting that off the ground, working through the bureaucracy of getting it approved, there was a lot of, there were early morning and late night meetings by administrators, a parent volunteer with a full-time job. I mean, hours and hours of, to be frank, it's just unpaid labor just to get that going. I hope that as a model that becomes more of a thing, easier to get the money, easier to get off the ground, but it's rare. It is rare. And in general, field trips, pre-COVID, Field trips are rare or non-existent in the life of a public school child from pre-K 3 to 12th grade. And what we think of as field trips is we get on a bus and we go somewhere. Maybe we go to a museum, maybe we go to a farm a couple hours away. And those experiences can be rich and life-changing, but they're too rare or they don't happen. And so our philosophy is you got to get outside, rethink the field trip. You got to get outside in the neighborhood, and you can do that several times a week. And children will be able to discover and explore and ask questions in ways that it's very different when you're inside the classroom.
So why do you think it's so hard to convince schools and administrators about the advantages that outdoor education brings?
To be honest, I don't think it's hard to convince them of the advantages. And Christy Brock, who's the director of programming at Urban Adventure Squad, she and I always talk about the moment when you're talking to somebody and you ask them about a field trip they went on as a child, or you tell them about something Urban Adventure Squad is doing, and you can literally see like their eyes kind of pop open and they get really excited and they tell you a story. It's not the convincing of the value of it. It's the administrators and teachers we've been talking to, they're really tapped out. They're exhausted. And a lot of the responses that I get when I raise the issue is, it seems like that's a liability issue. That doesn't seem very safe to be walking around the neighborhood. There's an idea that this is fun and kind of nice to have, but it's not actual learning. That's something that we've dealt with. And the idea that you need infrastructure or that there's an equity issue because children aren't properly dressed. But what I have not understood is why we keep pushing to get to full capacity inside a classroom when we're still in a pandemic and we know that the outdoors is accessible, it's equitable, it's inexpensive.
So you think it's a mindset problem, or is it a sort of fear of change? What do you think?
I think it's a mindset problem. When we think about field trips, it's like the rare kind of fun thing. We don't always think of it as something that can hit all the marks that our school systems are expecting teachers to hit. Somehow I'm not sure frivolous is the right word, but sometimes it feels that way. I think culturally we have an idea that camp is fun and school is learning, and they're two different things. And we all know that, there are camps that do wonderful things. They teach robotics and kids learn to kayak and they grow things in gardens. And we can all sit here and say like, okay, what curriculum standards does that cover? And we'll all have answers for them. But we still separate those two things. And outdoor learning, people may have in their heads that like, outdoor learning means I have a garden at my school, which that is absolutely outdoor learning, but it depends how you use the garden. I mean, you can use the garden to plant flowers and vegetables and herbs, but you can also use a garden as an outdoor theater, place where kids can write and perform monologues. You can use the garden as a science laboratory. I mean, we're joking around with kids and making them laugh, but like we literally we were carrying mineral samples with us last week. And I was like, okay, guys, now we have to find a place to set up our geology lab. We are studying minerals in the woods, and the kids hiked with me into the woods. And when I say woods, I'm literally talking about a small woodsy urban park in the Brooklyn section of DC where we had our outdoor classroom. Mm-hmm. And all I needed was the backpack on my back, some mineral samples, some handouts. The kids had a bottle of water, and that's it.
Do you have any advice on how to get more outdoor learning in schools?
What I have some advice for is school systems, the public school systems, to look carefully at outdoor learning, because it is absolutely curriculum aligned. It is absolutely not expensive. And it is incredibly important for the emotional well-being and the intellectual curiosity of the students. But a huge barrier to it is the bureaucracy associated with accessing funding and resources in school systems, which is why a lot of principals and teachers are just not doing it. There has to be some embrace of the outdoor learning culture from the very top of the school system, and that will infuse the culture with it, which is, I think, where we all need to go.
Elana Mintz, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics. I'm sure I'll see you around. What lessons can we draw from my conversation with Elana Mintz? If we want to save education in the post-industrial world, even the post-pandemic world, we have to move from education as preparation, or in lingo, workforce development, to education as discovery. Both training and discovery have always been the purposes of education, but it has been divided by class. Workforce development is for the children from poorer families, and discovery the province of those with means. Nowhere is this difference clearer than between private and public schools. Within public school systems, you will see differences as well between schools in well-off neighborhoods and schools in low-income zip codes. There are some teachers in schools with low-income students who are individually inspirational, but generally, we tend to warehouse students from poorer families and push them towards workforce development while encouraging discovery for students from better off families. The pandemic widened this gap, often called the opportunity gap. And what I find exciting about the approach Urban Adventure Squad and Elana Mintz take is how they are helping turn education toward discovery for every child in every neighborhood, and that the model is adaptable. Although UAS runs its programs in Washington, D.C., its brand of outdoor learning can happen anywhere. Yes, it would be great to be showered with new resources, but their approach, using neighborhoods and communities as learning places, is less a demand for money and more a rally for changing our mindset. Yes, outdoor learning can save education, and there are fairly simple, resource-cheap ways of doing this, but we have to plan for it. As Elana also says, teachers don't have time to plan and to reorder the curriculum, so there needs to be clear leadership from school system leaders, from political leaders, to create a post-pandemic school culture that saves our education system. We end this episode with a segment on cicadas. Carol Allen writes the Insect Index column for Washington Gardener magazine and is an expert in the relationship between insects and plants, including running the integrated pest management team at U.S. Botanical Gardens. Carol Allen, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you very much.
You have a lot of experience dealing with insects. You write the Washington Gardener's Insect Index column, and then, of course, you have this long and storied experience with the U.S. Botanical Gardens, doing pest management. Cicadas aren't really pests in some ways, but but they are insects. And they're everywhere, but not really.
Okay, I think that one of the coolest things is we think that, they're going to be all over the mid-Atlantic states. So if you're really phobic about cicadas, go to the Eastern Shore because they're not there. So why are they not at the Eastern Shore?
Yes.
And I think the working theory is that the glaciers didn't put them there. So, whoa, that's going back a few years. So how does that all work? To me, it's a marvelous puzzle. So yes, they are everywhere, give or take. You're not going to find them in newer neighborhoods where the ground has just been scraped away, because that removes the nymphs, where the trees have all been cut down, that removes their food source. So agriculture, newer suburban areas, you're not going to have the concentration, but older neighborhoods where the trees have grown up, Tacoma Park, Bethesda, Chevy Chase, Northwest, whoa, we're going to have cicadas.
So I live in Aspen Hill, and my neighborhood was built around 1965, around then, so well beyond the 17 years. Um, but my backyard doesn't have very many cicadas. However, when I go to the front, a couple of trees in the right of way, there are a ton of cicadas. What explains that difference? It's even, almost the same biological environment.
Well, except that you're not. I mean, you're not the environment that the cicadas evolved with, and we always have to factor that in. Ecologists like to look, entomologists like to look at what factors influence population density, and one of the things is what resources offer the cicadas. And we know that the nymphs are underground for 17 years and they're sucking on those roots and they're getting sugars, they're getting carbon from that tree. Now, if you cut down that tree, what's going to happen to those nymphs? They're either not going to, a large number are not going to survive. Some will probably migrate to another carbon source, another plant, but some won't. Some will just die. So a certain amount of that happens in our suburban neighborhoods. Some of the older trees that maybe the surrounding area has remained healthy, okay, that area is going to have a higher number of cicadas. If it's one of the trees that produces a lot of carbons and supports a large population, you're going to have more emergence there. But there's a lot of things happen in 17 years, particularly when we're talking about our suburban environments. Wow, things change.
Do you think there are any differences between trees where they congregate and trees where they don't?
There has been observed that there are favored trees, maples, oaks. My favorite, redbuds. They like redbuds. I want to go out and net all of my redbuds to protect them. And then there are some trees like tulip poplars that they actually don't favor as much. But, carbon is carbon and push comes to shove. They have a survival instinct so that they're going to survive. But how dense? And then something that you and I talked about earlier, the amount of sunlight which stimulates plant growth and would provide the nymphs with more carbon. Are we going to have a more successful population at the roots of that tree that got more sun? Or maybe it's a species that grows faster, produces more carbon. So you can see there's going to be a relationship between species, the immediate environment around that tree, more sun, less sun. And then 17 years ago, was the population successful in the adult stage that we have a lot of females actually laying in that area so that they were able to kind of seed that nymphal population with their egg laying? How successful was the previous generation? There's a Gordian's knot of interesting facts.
I agree. I totally agree. So the observation that struck me really was when I walked into Rock Creek Park with my dog, and we were walking, and the roar of the cicadas just died. I was walking through the neighborhood, and there was this the roar was pretty loud, and then I went into the woods and they disappeared. And can you explain that puzzle?
Yes, we're just on the leading edge of emergence. And something that I have observed here, because I'm still a little COVID isolated, all right? I don't get around as much as I used to. But I live on the top of a ridge. And my front yard is on the south side of the ridge. My backyard is on the north side of the ridge. And you can go out today and you can hear the bzzz coming from the south side, where it warmed up faster. It hit that threshold of 64 degrees before the guys in the backyard have even woken up. So we've got 64 degrees on the sun side, and we're cooler on the shady side. So you're going to get, at this early stage, I think you're going to get really uneven emergence. Just give it 10 days, 2 weeks. They're going to be there for you in Rock Creek Park.
Okay, so if your temperature hypothesis is correct, then Rock Creek Park should fill up soon. If it doesn't, then what? Then what's going on?
Wow, then you have a real head scratcher. And Mike Ropp and his cicada team are going to be out there studying emergence holes and mating success and all kinds of things, because now you've got other factors to think about. I'm fairly confident that give it 2 weeks and you're going to have that chainsaw sound in Rock Creek Park.
Well, okay, I gotta say I'm looking forward to that. I have also heard that managed orchards and sort of suburban environments where there's significant fertilizer use um, helps increase the density of cicadas. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that that's a pretty good working hypothesis. Again, it all goes back to how much carbon is the tree producing, how many nymphs can it support over time, and then 17 years later we'll have a population success or decline depending on how that orchard is managed. And of course, then we have to think about, today's orchards with their high density, all right, those trees, they're like crack addicts. They've got to have that fertilizer,
Sure.
or they're going to decline. So having cicada nymphs sucking on your toes, all right, your roots, is going to be a stress. It's going to be an additional stress to that tree. And that's going to maybe decrease its production, all right? The apples may be smaller. It might be more susceptible to pests and diseases because its general health and well-being is decreased because of a high population of cicadas. So this is something that orchardists have to think about, the effect of cicadas on their production.
It is potentially the case then that more housing developments could lead to greater densities of cicadas in the coming generations.
Yeah, except for one minor factor.
Mhm.
When they put in a subdivision, they scrape all the soil off. So immediately you've lost your nymphal population, or it's been so negatively impacted. Maybe there's 1 or 2 remnant trees in a common area here and a common area there. So you've got all kinds of interesting questions to answer. Are you going to get genetic isolation? Oh, because they're not mating in a larger population. So are we going to be line breeding cicadas? I think that as we mow down more wooded areas that support cicadas and put in the stereotypic American lawn, sad, all right, that we're going to see, if I were to live another 50, 60 years, 70 years, I would probably see a decline in overall population numbers as we continue to develop.
Okay. So I want to ask you a question about how we can use Brood X and emergence.
Brood 10,
Brood 10. I'm sorry. Brood 10.
By the way, you are admiring my commemorative T-shirt, all right, which you can get from the University of Maryland Entomology Department from the cicada crew.
Oh, I will definitely go there.
You gotta have
You
the
gotta have
bling.
that.
You gotta have it.
I agree. I'm going to go there soon. So I want to ask you, how do you think we could use Brood 10 to teach children about insects and about science and observation? How can we do that?
This is a golden opportunity to get the kids out. Let's face it, the cicadas are going to be literally in their face. You can't avoid them. So I think one of the best gifts that my mother ever gave me growing up, she's a gardener, is she put her phobias aside. If I brought her a caterpillar, if I brought her a bug, it was, oh, look at that. Let's look it up and find out what it does. So we can use cicadas to, first of all, instill a sense of wonder and curiosity and add a dollop of respect. What does this insect do in our ecological system? How is it important to us? Even though it flies in our face or on our shirt and you go, ooh, come on, get off of me. First of all, we know that they're harmless. So now a child's natural curiosity can be fed because it is harmless. It's not going to bite. It's not going to sting. It's got little legs. It's going to tickle. But now we can look at these things much more closely and hopefully, again, arouse that respect and curiosity that naturally occurs in kids and get them out of those four walls. Get them out in the park. Let's look at cicadas. Where are the emergence holes? Look at the nymphal skins. Ooh, pick up the nymphal skin. Scare your little sister with the nymphal skin. All of those wonderful interactions that we enjoy during childhood. This is a golden opportunity.
Well, Carol Ann, thank you so much for coming on. That's all for this episode. You should know that the Bethesda candy shop Chouquette Chocolates is selling chocolate-covered cicadas. You have to special order them. We love to hear from you with love or criticism. This one, however, was full of love.
This is David Fishback from Olney, Maryland. I wanted to thank Sunil for the outstanding May 7 I Hate Politics podcast on budgeting. The discussion with expert Roy Meyer was amazingly enlightening. It is often said that governmental budgets are moral documents, but the devil, or the angel, is so often in the details. Helping us learn about the structures behind those details is a great public service. Keep up the good work.
We used original music from DC area band Bad Robot Jones, Zach Parkman on vocals and guitar, Doogie Whitaker on bass and vocals, and Joey Jenkins on drums. I'm very much looking forward to showcasing local talent and especially local music students on the podcast. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone who might want to, please email us at ihppod@gmail.com or reach out on Twitter at ihppod. I hope you will subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and your home. See you next time.